The big manifesto launch this week was Alliance, another bulky document. David, prescription charges was the big issue for you?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a bit of a U-turn on prescription charges in Alliance when they were first abolished by, I think it was Michael McCann back when he was Health Minister. Alliance lauded it. Now they're saying, well, maybe it's time for them to come back. And of course, Jim Wells did try when he was Health Minister to bring them back, but then was scrapped by Simon Hamilton. So obviously, I suppose the talk of the town is how we pay for new spending, how, particularly with the health budget going up and up and up and up and up, and there's limited resources there to pay for them. So this is Alliance's way of trying to get some more revenue and some resource in to fund things like prescription drugs and cancer treatment.
Yeah, I don't think it would release a great deal of revenue. You know, it wouldn't put much of a hole, wouldn't fill much of the hole in the health budget. Felicity, you questioned the figures, did you?
Well, I heard Stephen Farry trying to defend them a few days ago. He was talking about raising something like 10 million, but then the admin costs are 3 million. But I mean, realistically, 10 million, who is going to pay them? If we have a system like the last time, as I used to think I was the only person in my local chemist who actually had to pay prescription charges. There are so many exemptions, and it's such a controversial thing if we suddenly, so-and-so can't have it now, but they did have last time. It will not work, and even 10 million is a drop in the ocean, in fact a 7 net, towards the problems of our health service.
Yeah. If you were going to do it, that was the thing that Jim Wells was proposing. He proposed a flat rate, flat low rate with bugger all exemptions, so everyone was paying. It was a smaller charge, but everyone was paying in, because he made that point about the last time. Bugger all people were paying, and the admin cost of just administering this thing was just a nightmare.
Absolutely, it's like the plastic bag levels, when you see how little revenue is brought in from individual shops and how much it must be costing. You know, they said the money was going to be spent on things, but I can't really imagine there's anything left by it, and it'll be the same. The flat rate is probably the only way to do it, but there will be people screaming and yelling about it still.
Okay, but Alliance is maybe the party that's most serious about addressing revenue raising. You know, we hear that the Shinners are always banging on about let's devolve tax raising powers and all that. They're rarely specific, I don't think, about what they would actually implement. Alliance, you think that they're progressive in terms of their...
Well, they have at least flagged up the issue that somehow we're going to have to pay for our water system, which is brave of them, and I suppose given that they know whatever their optimistic predictions are, that they're never going to be in control of anything very big, and they can put up these things, but at least they are facing up to it. But nobody really wants to bite the bullet and accept that, for example, our water charges, and we've got to do something. The water system's crumbling and it has to be paid for somehow.
Okay, and David Ford talking about winning 11 seats, that's 3 extra seats. I think North Down, South Belfast and East Belfast they're targeting. How do you view their prospects, David?
Well, I mean, it's pretty much a consensus that this will be David Ford's last election campaign as party leader. So I think he put the number on it. Most political parties, press officers will tell every candidate, never put a number on your thing, because if you fall short of it, which I think David Ford will, people will immediately say to you, your campaign failed. So I think it was a bit of an error of judgment to that. But having said that, it's his last election. They do have some targets. I think inevitably in all the 3 seats we just named, I think they will fall short in them. We're not seeing any real momentum toward Alliance. There's no hostility toward them either. I think they'll hold their rate. They're not going to lose anything, but I see no evidence of a surge or a bit of momentum towards it.
Yeah, that sort of lift they had post flag protest seems to have petered out.
I mean, they've never really had a lift. They just lurk around 10% roughly, and it is in some way a terrible reflection of Northern Ireland politics that what is apparently the middle of the road stays at about that same level throughout. I mean, yeah, David was very brave in putting a number on it. Of course, if he gets more than that, people will really go very excited, but it's very unlikely. I'm in East Belfast. Naomi will, I'm sure, walk it back, and she's had a very high profile. I would hope that she may take over as party leader. I would think she's the obvious person for it. We have Chris Little and one of the Morrows standing as well. I think Chris will probably get elected because he's been working hard locally. I'm not sure about a third one. I think that's very optimistic.
Okay, and in North Down they'll be targeting Stephen Agnew, the Green Party leader's seat. Stephen also put a number on his aspirations for the next term with 3 seats. How realistic is that, Felicity?
Well, I think it's optimistic again. I mean, it's hard to know. It depends on the world you live in, and because of social media, I think we all end up thinking that, oh yes, that so and so is going to do well, because you see his feed on Twitter, you see stuff on Facebook, and the world I live in, I because of my interest in, for example, animal welfare, the Greens are very big on that, so I see a lot of stuff they're doing. So I think, oh goodness, they're getting a lift. But I'm quite sure 2 doors down, where nobody's interested in those things, they hardly know the Greens exist. So I don't think there will be any massive breakthrough there either.
He's a good record in the Assembly.
He does, but I do agree with Felicity that there's a difference between what goes on in the Stormont bubble, the social media bubble, and what Mr. and Mrs. Joe Punter outside see and feel. I think Agnew, the seat is marginal that he's on. He can't afford any real slippage in his vote. But I would still expect him to get elected. I'm assuming he's targeting South Belfast and East Belfast. I think that from what we are hearing from other parties, that Claire Bailey is registering more on the doorsteps than she did last time, but it's still a massive jump for her to get a seat. So I think what the story of the election for the Greens will be is strong showings, maybe something to build on for an election or 2 down the line, but I don't think we'll see any big breakthroughs on May 5th.
Well, I think there's also an argument that the Green tide, Europe-wide, has gone. The big chance.
Yeah.
We're behind the times with so many things in Northern Ireland. And Green politics, it could be argued as well. The big momentum Europe-wide, that's gone.
And if you think about the environment isn't really a big issue in the selection campaign.
It doesn't. No, it's regarded as progressive politics, and that doesn't really fit here in Northern Ireland. Now, just briefly, Felicity, their zero waste policy was the big policy in the manifesto. You say that they do that in Copenhagen?
Yes, as far as I recall from visiting Copenhagen, which is a very different place from Northern Ireland, they do have that. I mean, it's a completely different environment in many ways that they live in, and that is one of their achievements there, I understand, or something very similar. So obviously it can be done, and I mean, Denmark is a small country like us, and interestingly it has one large city and then a big rural population. There are similarities, but I think that's probably where it ends.
Yeah, big jump from a plastic bag tax to a zero waste policy. Okay, just again, we mentioned it last week in passing, but abortion seems to have become the big issue of the election. As I'm of the opinion that it won't get me to vote for anybody, but it maybe might get me to not vote for certain parties. Do you think it's the only thing that's grabbing the public's imagination?
I think it is, but I think that's more symbolic of the lack of anything else going on in the campaign. The reason why I think abortion rights is filling the airways, because let's be honest, we've reviewed all the manifestos so far, and very few parties have anything really of interest to say to anyone. We're getting wee kind of skirmishes about corporation tax, so I think that's the reason why abortion rights, and particularly with the courts at the moment, that's the reason why. So it is fitting in. It's fitting in with the issue. In terms of will it move votes, I think on the national, it's a much more of an issue on the national side of politics than it is on the unionist side. Between Sinn Féin and the SDLP, there is this sense that maybe the SDLP, particularly outside of Belfast, have tapped into this pro-life vote, and it is hurting Sinn Féin in places like Foyle, Fermanagh, South Tyrone, and Mid-Ulster, and places like that. So whether that actually comes to pass on May 5th, I'm not so sure. There is a line of thought that that Michelle Gildernew lost Fermanagh, South Tyrone on the basis of the abortion last time. That Tom Elliott got in ahead of her by just 500 votes. That was one of the reasons for the margin of victory. But again, whether
is that why they're backpedaling furiously on we're not a pro-choice party? There seems to be a big thing. Oh, we're not pro-choice. We're not pro-choice.
No,
which doesn't fit in with Marxism and social international socialism and the sisterhood and all that stuff. Just where Sinn Féin comes from.
Well, I suppose this is the same thing across. I mean, the SDLP are Social Democratic Party. They're sister parties in Irish Labour, PSOE in Spain, Portugal, Italy. All Catholic countries, yet all of them have pro-choice positions except for the SDLP. So it is a bit of a strange dynamic.
You wonder what they say to each other when they meet them. At these international conferences and things, and they say, is it true that your abortion
They all sit in the same European group, and
your legislation goes back to 1861, and they're going, well, yeah, what's wrong with that?
Yeah.
They must be a bit embarrassed.
But
Do you think so?
electoral dynamics, I think, is really what's at play. And obviously, I mean, but because there's very little that differentiates the SDLP and Sinn Féin realistically these days. It's a wedge issue. It's what US politics is about, wedge issues, and it's about trying to divide a group of people. So, but I mean, the next mandate's going to have to deal with this in some shape or form. So the SDLP will have to develop a much more coherent policy. No matter what you may think about Sinn Féin's policy on the issue, rights and wrongs of it, and we can have that debate. It is much more coherent, and you kind of know what you're voting for when you vote for a Sinn Féin candidate. Whereas the SDLP is a bit, we don't know what's coming up.
Okay, Felicity, do you think that the generally the pro-life bias among our parties is reflective of public opinion or out of step with public opinion?
Well, I mean, if you looked at the young people's debate the other night on the TV, it was woefully out of step. I mean, they have a very different view, and I mean, the surveys and so on of Northern Ireland suggest that they are out of step, but they are entrenched with it, and presumably they think that the people who vote for them want this. I mean, there's a database available online of how all the MLAs, all the candidates for the elections, their position on the abortion and laws, and the various stages of it, from fetal.
Okay, yeah, that's the Plath Diaries. You can find out what every
on Twitter,
each candidate.
Every
candidate
Okay.
on the Plath Diaries on Twitter. Each candidate. As far as from what I can see, they've got an answer out of every one of them on who is willing to support what, and I think that whichever view you take on abortion or where you are, it is very useful and very interesting.